Hey everybody, welcome back once again. I've spent the last couple months developing a whole slew of new content, new tutorials that we're going to be talking about in this ever-changing landscape that is web design. And we're going to be dealing with HTML5 and CSS3 and jQuery and JavaScript and Ajax and all kinds of cool stuff. But before we get too far into that, I wanted to take a second, do a tutorial, make sure that everybody's on the same page as far as web browsers go. And well, a web browser is one of the most important tools that you have as a web developer because you don't know what your end user is viewing your web page on. And I want to talk about this for a second. What is a web browser? Well, a web browser is a software application that's written for your computer that allows you to access content delivered via the internet. And this content can be file-based, so it could be a video file, it could be an audio file, it could be a text file, it could be an image, and it's also HTML-based. And HTML, as you know, is the language that kind of brings the internet together. And so it brings elements together to display in a very designed, published format, if you will. And so that's what a web browser is. And a brief history of this, the first web browser was known as World Wide Web, and it was developed by Tim Berners-Lee in the late 80s when he was working at Next Computer, which was Steve Jobs' company after leaving Apple in the mid-80s. And this was the first web browser. And as you know, Tim Berners-Lee is one of the founders of the World Wide Web and really considered a key figure in that. And this was the web browser that he developed. This was very crude by today's standards. It was text only and just dealt with marked up text. The next significant development in this was in 1993 when NCSA released a web browser called Mosaic. And Mosaic was very significant because it was the first web browser that would allow you to display images. And so the image tag was born, and this really, changed everything. It made the internet a real viable publishing medium. And shortly after that, in about 1994, you have Netscape and Internet Explorer that come along and start waging this browser war that continued through the late 90s. AOL jumped on with their own browser, and really, if you remember this time, it was not a very fun time to be a web developer. These companies were all trying to fight each other and get more customers by, having features and toolbars and things, and sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't. There were all kinds of, in all fairness, I should say that HTML has been evolving ever since too. When I mentioned Mosaic and the fact that you have an image tag now, and so there was no standard for the way code was rendered. And in fairness, it's also important to say that HTML is not a mature code. It's a markup language, and it's important that this stay loose and be able to evolve. Otherwise, you never get past these dark ages of web browsers. And anyway, so at the time, you have your web page looking one way in one browser and it would break in another, and have to know how to get around bug fixes for just the most basic code. If you had a carriage return in the wrong place, you could throw your whole layout out. And so there was a lot of work done at this time in at the end of your web project, just getting it to look right in every major browser. And anyway, there's a big difference in the way that was done then and the way it's done now. Browsers have matured greatly. They're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. They're evolving. And we're in a transition period right now at the time I'm filming this tutorial, which is early 2011. And we have on the horizon these new technologies like HTML5, CSS3, and the browsers will support elements of those. So you can actually start using those now. In fact, you probably should start using those now in preparation for the future. But there's still some inconsistencies because not everything has been defined, not everything has been built into a spec, and not everything is supported. So anyway, browsers today are built on browser engines. And what is a browser engine? Well, a browser engine is a framework of code that deal with how a web page is rendered. And so if you're a software developer and you're going to build a web browser for a computer, you would probably base it on one of these four engines that are in use today. The first and most proliferated is the Trident engine, which is the framework that Internet Explorer runs on. And there are variations of each one of these. So there's Internet Explorer for the desktop. There's also a mobile version of Internet Explorer, etc. The second one is WebKit, which is a very mature framework, and it is what software like Safari and Google Chrome are built on, and it's actually very nice. There's also the Gecko framework, which is very mature as well. Firefox and Camino are both Mozilla projects, and we'll talk about those in a second. They're based on that framework. And then finally, there's the Presto framework, which is what Opera is built on. And Opera is probably one of the lesser used browsers, but it's still enough to pay attention to. So anyway, real quick, why would would you need to make sure that you have all of these browsers downloaded and ready to use? Well, first of all, if you're on Mac, I should say that Internet Explorer is Windows only, and if you're a developer who uses Apple as your computer platform, you want to make sure that you test your projects on Windows machines, obviously, before they go live, but goes without saying. But real quick, let's bounce over. This is Google Analytics, and if you're not familiar with Analytics, we'll do a tutorial on this later, but basically this is a web app that Google runs that allows you to collect statistics from views on a web page. And right here, this is the browser statistics, and this tells me that people visiting this website are using these browsers. And this is pretty fair, for the most part, view of what most websites on the internet look like. And you can see in this pie graph over here, this big blue area is Internet Explorer. Most people are on Windows. They dominate the market, and this is 57.23% of the visits were on Internet Explorer in the last 30 days. Right behind that, the other half is kind of sort of evenly divided between Safari and Firefox, and with Google Chrome all of a sudden starting to take a huge share of that. You can see that it breaks it down further. Here's an unknown browser, but it's a Mozilla compatible agent, so it was something built on the Mozilla framework. Opera was in there with 0.28%, which is still significant enough. It was 9 visits in the last month. And then you have mobile browsers. There's BlackBerry, which comes under that, which is Research in Motion. So anyway, this is basically why you want to have environments to test your web page cross-platform into all these things. So this is very important. If you do not have, or if you're not sure, make sure you have the latest versions of each browser too. And this is very important. I'll come back to this in a second. Internet Explorer can be found if you're on Windows. It's baked into your system here, but the web page to make sure or download an update is microsoft.com/windows/internet-explorer, and it is not available for the Mac, which I'm recording this on. That's why it's telling me I can't download it. And then if you go to mozilla.org/projects, and this is an awesome page, and it gets me way off subject when I look at it because they have all the developer tools, all their labs, everything is here. But the major browsers here that you want to download would be Firefox for desktop. And then Camino is not a widely used browser, but it's a very good browser, and it's definitely worth downloading and trying out. I'm not a commercial for Mozilla by any stretch of the imagination, but you might want to use that for testing your web pages. It probably will be pretty consistent between Camino and Firefox, but it's worth checking anyway. Onto the WebKit stuff. Even if you're on Windows, go ahead and download Safari. It's available for Windows, and it's a pretty decent browser on both Mac and on PC. So Safari 5 is the latest version, so you might want to make sure you have the latest there. Google Chrome is a new player, but a very, very interesting and good browser. I use it quite a bit. And it's probably one of my main browsers just for general surfing, but the link for that is google.com/Chrome. And then finally, I would go to opera.com and make sure that you have an Opera browser to test your web pages on. Now, version numbers are important for the most part, particularly with the big evil one, which is Internet Explorer. And Internet Explorer 8 is the current version that Microsoft is putting on computers. So if you go buy a brand new computer today, we'll have Internet Explorer 8 on there. Version 9 is in beta. They're developing it right now, and version 9 hopefully will take care of a lot of the problems that we've seen in Internet Explorer in the past. Again, none of these are perfect, but IE, for whatever reason, tends to be the biggest thorn in the side as far as web development goes. Version 8 is decent. It's easier to develop for. You probably will have to support Internet Explorer 7, and this gets difficult because you can only have one version of Explorer installed on your computer at a time. You can't toggle between them, and so it's a good idea to have access to a Windows machine that has 7 on it. Now here's the deal, and this is a little bit of a subjective statement, but as far as legacy support goes, there are, believe it or not, still people out there using Internet Explorer 6, and they consist of people who are at home and have never upgraded their software, who are very casual internet users, and it also consists of people at businesses that for whatever reason need to stay with older versions for legacy compatibility with other applications. Anyway, needless to say, again, this is a subjective statement, but personally as a developer, when I start a project for a client, I make it very clear that I do not support Internet Explorer 6 or anything before that. It's 7 and up. And the reason is and there's a couple ways you can look at this. First of all, if somebody is browsing the web using Internet Explorer 6, they're probably going to be used to a certain quality that comes down with that. A lot of web pages are going to have malfunctioning issues within them. You won't be the only one. And so that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that as developers, if we do not start supporting current versions of things, it allows everybody from companies to software manufacturers to users to be lazy and not stay updated to the latest version. So I will format for Internet Explorer 6 if I have to, but I always make that very clear to clients up front that I simply don't have the time within the normal project scope to do that. So it ends up costing more money and allows more time to be developed. So anyway, just know that going in. And Microsoft even has discontinued support for Explorer 6, thank goodness. So anyway, but make sure you have, I'll go back to the sheet here, but make sure you have the browser engines, the one of at least one of each of these. In fact, I would have every browser on your computer that's listed here. If you're on Windows, you can get all of them. If you're on Apple, you can get all of them but Internet Explorer. So anyway, that's a brief overview of browsers and why they're important, and we're going to talk a lot in the coming tutorials about, especially when we get into CSS3, certain things are supported, certain things are not, and you need to know which browsers support them and which browsers are having trouble with them, and you need to know what your page is going to look like across the board for your viewers on your website. So anyway, once again, thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next episode.